The moment my sister said it, the room erupted. "All 15 rentals are mine," she declared, her voice loud, rehearsed, victorious. She gets nothing. People actually clapped. I watched my aunts smile. I watched my cousins nod. I watched my parents stay silent, and in that silence, choose her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even blink. I smiled slowly, deliberately, and turned my head toward my father. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my chest was burning, "you really don't know, do you?" The applause died instantly, like someone had cut the power. My father froze, his face draining of color. My sister spun toward me, panic flashing through her confidence. "No what?" she demanded. And that's when I realized something none of them had considered. They thought this meeting was about who deserved the properties. I knew it was about who legally owned them. The meeting took place in my parents' formal dining room, the one that always smelled faintly of old wood and polished silver. It was the room reserved for moments when the family wanted to look united: birthdays, holidays, conversations where decisions were made without asking everyone involved. I arrived a few minutes late on purpose. When I stepped inside, every chair was already taken except one at the far end of the table. My sister sat near the head, right beside my father. Her posture was relaxed, confident, as if she belonged there more than anyone else. A thick leather folder rested in front of her, neatly aligned with the edge of the table. My mother stood behind her chair, one hand resting on the back, the other lightly touching my sister's shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. I took my seat quietly. No one greeted me. No one asked how I'd been. It was my uncle who broke the silence, clearing his throat like he was opening a meeting at work. "Well," he said, glancing around the table, "we're all here. Let's talk about the properties." My sister didn't wait for permission. "As everyone knows," she began smoothly, folding her hands together, "I've been managing the rentals for years now, dealing with tenants, repairs, late payments, city inspections, all of it." She paused, letting the words settle, then continued. 15 rental properties across 3 cities. That's not something you hand over to someone who doesn't understand how much work it takes. Several heads nodded. My aunt smiled approvingly. She's right. She's always been the responsible one. My sister glanced at me briefly before looking back at the others. "And Eleanor," she said, as if explaining something obvious to a child, "has never shown any real interest in the rentals." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. "She has her own life," my sister continued, "her own career, a desk job. Nothing wrong with that. But this," she gestured vaguely with one hand, "this isn't her world." Someone laughed softly. I kept my gaze on the table. My cousin leaned forward. "Honestly, what would Eleanor even do with 15 rentals? I mean," my sister added quickly, seizing the moment, "she's always been sensitive, detail-oriented, not exactly built for this kind of responsibility." Built, like I was missing a part. I looked at my father then, hoping stupidly that he might say something, that he might remember all the years I'd quietly handled things no one else wanted to deal with. He didn't meet my eyes. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was gentle, soothing, the way she always sounded when she wanted to smooth something over without changing anything. "We just want what's best for the family." Not for me, for the family. My sister straightened, sensing the room was fully behind her now. "So let's not dance around it," she said firmly. "I've already spoken with the accountant. I've handled the logistics. It's cleanest this way." She turned toward me, her expression polite but cold. "All 15 rentals are mine. Eleanor gets nothing." The words landed heavily, but the room stayed quiet. No shock, no protest, because to them this wasn't cruelty, it was efficiency. My sister leaned back in her chair, satisfied, like she'd just closed a deal. She watched me closely, waiting for something. Anger, tears, an outburst. Something she could point to and say, "See, this is why she can't handle things." I felt every eye on me. My hands rested in my lap, perfectly still. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even blink. I smiled slowly, deliberately, and turned my head toward my father. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my chest was burning, "you really don't know, do you?" They kept talking after that. That was the strangest part. Once my sister made her declaration, the conversation shifted as if my future had been filed away and forgotten. Plates were nudged aside, someone poured more water. My aunt asked whether the accountant should be looped in to finalize things. I sat there, breathing slowly, listening. For years, this had been my role, present but optional, seen but not considered. It was almost comforting how predictable they were. My sister crossed her legs and leaned toward my father. "I'll need access to the remaining files," she said casually. "Some of the older records are still scattered." My father nodded. "Whatever you need." I noticed how easily he said it, how little hesitation there was. My sister smiled, encouraged. "I'll also need the spare keys. Some tenants are overdue and I want to make sure everything's handled efficiently." "Efficiently," I said quietly, glancing up. "You mean the tenants on Maple Street?" The table went silent again, but this time it was different. My sister turned toward me, surprised. "What about them?" "Nothing," I said, shrugging lightly. "Just thought you might want to be specific." She stared at me a second too long before recovering. "I manage all of them, Eleanor. You wouldn't understand the details." That was her favorite line. I nodded as if accepting the explanation, but my mind replayed memories she didn't know. Late-night emails from tenants she claimed didn't exist, invoices that never matched the work described, deposits that disappeared for weeks before showing up again. I had noticed. I had always noticed. My uncle chuckled awkwardly. "Eleanor's always been observant. Maybe she should have gone into accounting. Or surveillance," my cousin joked. Laughter followed. I smiled politely, even as my stomach tightened. My sister leaned closer to me, lowering her voice. "You don't have to do this," she said. "We can keep things simple." "Simple for who?" I asked. Her eyes hardened. "For everyone." That was the difference between us. She believed everyone meant the people with the loudest voices. I believed it meant the people affected by the truth. My mother cleared her throat. "Eleanor, sweetheart, if something's bothering you, you should say it now." I looked at her. Then really looked at her. All those years she'd told me to be patient, to keep the peace, to not rock the boat. I took a breath. "I'm not bothered," I said calmly. "I'm just trying to understand how we reached this conclusion." My sister scoffed. "It's obvious." "Is it?" I asked. She straightened in her chair. "Yes, Grandpa left the properties to Dad. Dad let me manage them. I've done the work. End of story." She said it with certainty, like repetition alone could make it unbreakable. I turned to my father. "Is that what you believe?" I asked gently. He hesitated. Just for a moment, but it was enough. The hesitation moved through the room like a draft. My aunt shifted in her seat. My uncle frowned slightly. My sister noticed it too. Her jaw tightened. Her foot tapped once against the floor. "Dad," she said sharply, "you know this." He nodded, but his voice was softer now. "That's how I understood it, yes. Understood. Not confirmed, not verified. Understood." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands again. "Okay," I said quietly. My sister exhaled in relief, mistaking my response for retreat. "Good," she said. "Then we're done here." She looked around the table, already moving on. What she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the more they spoke, the clearer it became. They weren't lying, they were assuming, and assumptions are fragile things. I glanced down at my bag resting beside my chair. Inside it was everything they hadn't asked to see. I didn't reach for it yet, not because I was afraid, but because timing matters, and the moment they felt most certain was the moment the truth would do the most damage. My sister was already gathering her folder when I spoke again. "Dad," I said. My voice wasn't loud. I didn't need it to be. She froze mid-motion, her fingers still resting on the leather cover. "Yes," my father answered, looking tired now, older than he had when the meeting began. I chose my words carefully. "Before we end this," I said, "can I ask you something?" My sister let out a sharp breath. "Eleanor, we've already—" "Just one question." I held up a finger. I didn't look at her. "Please." The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way it does, when people sense something is about to change, but don't yet know how. My father nodded slowly. "All right." I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table. Did Grandpa ever tell you that he transferred the rental properties before he died? The air seemed to thicken. My father blinked. Transferred? My sister laughed immediately, too fast, too loud. That's ridiculous, she said. Everything went through the estate, you know that. I didn't look at her. I'm asking Dad, I said. My father frowned, searching his memory. I don't think so. Did you ever see the deeds yourself? I asked gently. That was when his confusion deepened into something closer to concern. I trusted your sister with the paperwork. She handled all of that. Margaret's smile stiffened. That's because you asked me to, she said quickly. Someone had to be responsible. I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. And when you say the paperwork, I continued, turning back to my father, do you mean copies of the deeds or just summaries? My aunt leaned forward now. Why does that matter? Because, I said, keeping my voice even, summaries aren't ownership. My sister pushed her chair back slightly, just an inch, but enough to make the legs scrape softly against the floor. You're overcomplicating this, she snapped. Grandpa wouldn't have done something like that without telling us. I finally looked at her. You mean telling you, I said. Her eyes flashed. What does that supposed to mean? It means Grandpa and I talked more than you think. That landed harder than I expected. My mother stiffened. Eleanor, why didn't you ever say anything? I held her gaze. Because no one ever asked. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind, not the kind you can talk your way out of. My sister folded her arms tightly across her chest. You're implying something, she said. If you have something to say, say it. I took a breath. I am saying, I replied, that I don't think we're all working from the same information. My father rubbed his temple. Eleanor, are you saying the properties aren't part of the estate? I'm saying, I answered carefully, that Grandpa settled certain things while he was still alive. My sister stood up abruptly. This is insane, she said. You're confused, or worse, you're trying to cause problems. I didn't move. I'm trying to prevent them, I said quietly. She stared at me, searching my face for hesitation, for doubt, for something she could exploit. She didn't find it. My uncle broke the silence. If that's true, he said slowly, then we should probably check. Margaret spun toward him. There's nothing to check. I reached down and placed my hand on my bag. For the first time since the meeting began, I felt the room shift, not toward me, but away from her. I agree, I said softly. We should check. My sister's voice rose. Check what? I met her eyes and smiled. Not the polite one from before, but something calmer, steadier. The records, I said. My father swallowed. Eleanor, he asked quietly, what exactly do you have? I didn't answer him right away, because once I did, there would be no pretending this was just a misunderstanding. I let the silence stretch long enough for everyone to feel it. Then I said enough to make sure we stopped guessing, and for the first time that afternoon, my sister looked afraid. I didn't rush. That was the mistake they kept expecting me to make. Instead, I opened my bag slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of the zipper fill the silence. Every eye in the room followed the movement, as if whatever I was about to pull out might physically strike someone. I took out my phone first and placed it on the table, screen down. Then I slid a thin folder forward, plain, unmarked, nothing like the thick leather binder my sister had brought to perform authority. Mr. Collins, I turned to our family attorney, could you pull up the county property records? My sister laughed, sharp and brittle. This is a waste of time. Mr. Collins hesitated. He glanced at my father, then at my sister, then back at me. Just the public records, I added calmly. Nothing private, nothing speculative. My father nodded, slower than before. Go ahead. The laptop opened. The projector hummed softly as the screen came to life. I read out the first address. Mr. Collins typed, clicked, paused. His eyebrows lifted. Owner, he read aloud carefully, Eleanor Grace Whitmore. The room inhaled as one.
My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "That can't be right." "It is," Mr. Collins said, eyes fixed on the screen. "It is recorded March 12th, 2018. My sister stepped closer to the table. "Pull the deed," she demanded. "You're reading it wrong." He did. The document filled the screen, notarized, stamped, my grandfather's signature looping across the bottom in the handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and letters for years. My name printed beneath it, clear, undeniable. "That's one," I said quietly. The second address, same result. The third, the fourth. 15 times the same truth repeated itself, each one landing harder than the last. No one spoke. The only sound in the room was my sister's breathing, too fast, too loud, like she was running out of air. My father sank back into his chair. "You've owned them?" he whispered, staring at the screen. "This whole time?" "Yes," I said. "Grandpa transferred them while he still could." My sister shook her head violently. "No, no, that doesn't make sense. I handled everything." "I handled the management," I said, "not the ownership." "That's not possible," she snapped. "Why would he do that?" I answered honestly, "Because Grandpa didn't trust appearances, he trusted records." My mother's voice trembled. "Why didn't he tell us?" "He told me," I said, "and he told me why." The words hung there, heavy. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. "These transfers are legally valid," he said. "They predate Mr. Whitmore's passing by over a year." My sister looked at my father, desperate now. "Dad, say something." He couldn't. He was still staring at the screen, at the proof he'd never asked to see. "I thought," he started, then stopped. "I assumed," I nodded. "That's what Grandpa was afraid of." My sister backed away from the table, her confidence draining with every step. "You're twisting this," she said. "You always twist things." I stayed where I was. "No," I replied, "I'm reading them." For the first time since the meeting began, the power in the room had shifted, not because I raised my voice, not because I demanded anything, but because facts have a way of standing on their own.
My sister looked around, searching for support. No one met her eyes. She turned back to me, her voice cracking. "So, what are you saying?" I met her gaze steadily. "I'm saying," I replied, "that this meeting isn't about who deserves the rentals." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "It's about who actually owns them." And with that, the story my family had believed for years finally collapsed under its own assumptions. For a moment, no one moved. The proof was still glowing on the screen behind us. 15 addresses, 15 confirmations, 15 quiet indictments of everything my sister had just claimed. The meeting that had begun with applause now felt like a room waiting for a verdict. Margaret was the first to break. "You planned this," she said, her voice sharp, brittle at the edges. "You let me talk. You let me embarrass myself." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "you did that on your own." She turned to my father, panic creeping into her eyes. "Dad, you know I took care of everything. I protected this family." "You managed what you were allowed to manage. That's not the same thing." My mother stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Eleanor, please," she said softly. "We don't need to tear each other apart." I felt something inside me tighten. "I didn't bring the truth into this room," I said. "It was already here." Margaret laughed, a hollow sound. "Oh, come on," she said. "You expect us to believe Grandpa secretly signed everything over to you and no one noticed?" "He noticed," I replied. "He just didn't announce it." I reached down and opened the plain folder I'd brought with me. This time, I didn't hesitate. Inside was a thick stack of documents, organized, tabbed, precise. For the last 5 years, I've been reviewing the rental accounts, quietly. Margaret's eyes widened. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said calmly. "I was the owner." I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward Mr. Collins. "Forensic summaries," I said. "Every rent payment received, every expense claimed, every gap." My uncle leaned forward, curiosity overtaking discomfort.
What kind of gaps? I met his eyes. Missing deposits, inflated repairs, vendors that don't exist. Margaret slammed her hand on the table. That's a lie. It's documented and verified. Mr. Collins flipped through the pages, his expression tightening with each turn. These aren't speculation, he said quietly. These are discrepancies. How much? My father asked, hoarsely. I swallowed once before answering. $243,900. The number hung in the air like smoke. My mother staggered back into her chair. That can't be right. Margaret shook her head violently. You're twisting numbers. That's not theft. That's miscommunication. Miscommunication doesn't create phantom invoices or cash payments that never reached the account. She turned on me, eyes blazing. You stayed quiet on purpose. You wanted me to fail. I stood slowly, steadily. I stayed quiet because Grandpa told me to, I said, my voice finally breaking through the careful calm. He warned me. He said if I spoke too soon, the truth would disappear under excuses. My father looked up sharply. He warned you about Margaret? Yes, I said, about anyone who confused access with entitlement. Margaret's voice cracked. You let me keep managing everything? I insisted you documented. I gazed at her, disbelief giving way to something raw. So what? You're going to sue your own sister? I held her gaze. I'm going to protect what's mine and hold people accountable. My mother reached for my arm. Family doesn't do this. I gently pulled away. Family also doesn't decide someone's worth without asking. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. My attorney's filing, I said. It goes in Monday. Margaret collapsed back into her chair as if the strength had drained from her body. Her confidence, her certainty, the story she'd built for years, all of it folded inward. The room felt smaller now, heavier. No one applauded, no one cheered, because this wasn't a victory, it was a reckoning. And as I looked around the table at the people who had once decided my future without me, I realized something else. The meeting wasn't about rentals anymore. It was about consequences, and for the first time, they were unavoidable. I didn't wait for anyone to say another word. There was nothing left to argue and nothing left to explain. The facts were already on the table, glowing coldly from the screen, stacked neatly inside the folder I had brought. Staying would only invite bargaining, and I was done negotiating my own reality. I gathered my bag and stood. Eleanor, my father said quietly, his voice unsteady, let's slow down. We can talk about this. We've been talking for years. This is the first time we're actually doing something. Margaret looked up at me then, her face pale, her confidence gone. You can't just walk away. This affects all of us. That's exactly why I'm walking away, I answered. I left the dining room without looking back. By Monday morning, the filing was submitted. I sat in my attorney's office, my hands resting flat on the desk as the clerk stamped the documents received. The sound was small, almost anticlimactic, but it felt like a line being drawn through 5 years of silence. Done.
By Tuesday, 2 investigators contacted me to schedule a meeting. We sat in a quiet coffee shop, my folder open between us, pages spread out like a map of decisions made without oversight. They asked questions. I answered calmly, methodically, the way I'd learned to when facts mattered more than feelings. No one raised their voice, no one accused me of anything. They simply took notes. That night, my phone vibrated non-stop. Margaret called and called again. Then text messages appeared, one after another. I didn't realize. I thought everything was approved. I can fix this. I read them all without replying. An hour later, a voicemail came through. Her voice was shaking now, stripped of the authority she'd worn so easily at the meeting. "Eleanor, please," she said. "I'll pay it back. I swear I never meant for this to happen." I listened once, then I deleted it. I typed a single message and sent it. Turn over the keys within 48 hours. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. By Thursday, I had already scheduled the locksmith. Standing outside the first rental property, keys warm in my palm, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt strangely grounded. The building looked ordinary. Faded siding, chipped paint, a child's bike leaning against the fence. This was what everyone had been fighting over. Not power, not status, responsibility. When the locks clicked into place, the sound echoed more loudly in my chest than it did on the door. For the first time, the properties were not just mine on paper, they were mine in practice. That evening, I sent formal notices to vendors and tenants, introducing myself not as someone's sister, not as a background figure, but as the owner. I kept the language professional, neutral, protective. No drama, no revenge, just clarity. As I closed my laptop, exhaustion finally settled in, but underneath it was something unfamiliar. Relief. The system was moving now, and for once it was moving in my direction. My father came alone that Saturday. No warnings, no messages beforehand, just a knock on my apartment door, hesitant and uneven, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. When I opened it, he stood in the hallway with his hands clasped in front of him, shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. He looked smaller, older, not the man who used to command rooms with his voice, but someone who had realized too late how much he'd missed. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, the space between us heavy with everything that had gone unsaid for years. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I waited. "I thought," he continued, swallowing hard, "that letting Margaret handle things was the safest choice. She was loud, confident, always asking for control. And you?" His voice trailed off. I was quiet. I finished for him. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I took that for compliance," he said, "for comfort." I stood and retrieved the packet of documents from my desk, the copies of the deeds, the timelines, the records that had lived in my life long before they mattered to him. I handed them to him. "You could have known," I said gently. "All of this was public. You just never looked." His hands shook as he flipped through the pages. "He trusted you," he whispered. "Yes, but he also trusted you to ask questions." Tears welled in his eyes, and when he looked up at me, they finally spilled over. "I didn't see you. Not really. I'm so sorry." The apology didn't fix everything, but it mattered. I spent years thinking I wasn't enough, that if I spoke louder or pushed harder, you'd notice me. He shook his head, his voice breaking. "You were always enough. I just wasn't paying attention." We sat in silence after that, not the tense kind, but the quiet that comes when there's nothing left to defend. He reached for my hand, tentative, like he wasn't sure I'd let him. I did. "I'm proud of you," he finally said, "not because of the properties, but because you stood up for yourself." I believed him, not because the words were perfect, but because they cost him something to say. When he left, the apartment felt different, lighter, not healed, but honest. And for the first time, I realized recognition, even when it comes late, can still change the shape of a wound. That night, after my father left, I sat alone at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the windows cracked just enough to let the city breathe in. I drafted emails slowly, carefully, introductions to tenants, notices to vendors, confirmations to the bank. Nothing dramatic, nothing personal, just clarity. For the first time, my name didn't feel like something I had to defend. It was simply mine. Over the next few days, responses came in. Tenants thanked me for explaining things clearly. One woman told me she was relieved to finally know who to contact when something broke. Another said, "My grandfather had spoken of you once, years ago." With quiet pride, I closed my eyes and let that sit with me. The properties weren't trophies, they were responsibilities. Places where people live their lives. Ordinary, fragile, important lives. That was what everyone else had missed. Margaret stopped calling. I didn't know what consequences she would face, and I didn't try to control that. I had learned that accountability didn't require cruelty. It required boundaries. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. Not vindicated, not victorious, just steady. One evening, as I locked up my office and stepped into the cool air outside, I realized something else had changed too. I wasn't measuring myself against my sister, or my parents, or anyone else's expectations. I had protected what was mine. I had told the truth when it mattered, and I had done it without becoming someone I didn't recognize. That was the real inheritance my grandfather left me. Not the properties, but the patience to watch, the courage to speak, and the wisdom to know when silence was preparation and when it was time to finally be heard. That night, I slept deeply. No rehearsing conversations, no guarding my name, just rest. And in the morning, I woke up knowing this: I didn't take anything from my family.
I claimed myself.